I used to believe that loneliness only crept into empty houses, that it only whispered through silence, echoed off the walls of a place abandoned. But now I know better. Loneliness doesn't wait for emptiness. It doesn't knock. It grows, even in houses full of life. There was a time I thought I had everything: a husband, a beautiful home, a respectable life, but I was wrong. What I had was a schedule, a performance, a life that looked whole from the outside, but hollowed me out from the inside. My husband and I used to talk, really talk, about books, dreams, nonsense. But now, even his hellos felt borrowed. His business trips became longer. The suitcase lived by the door more than he did. When he came home, he brought souvenirs, little pieces of the world, but not of himself. We hadn't touched in years. Not in the way that said, "I still see you." Not in the way that said, "I still want you." Instead, we coexisted, like furniture in a home. Useful, predictable, silent. And I became invisible. Polite smiles at neighborhood cookouts. Morning coffee with no warmth. I cooked dinners that went half-eaten. Cleaned rooms no one appreciated. Answered questions that never required real answers. How was your day? Fine. Always fine. But I wasn't fine. I was vanishing. The thing about disappearing slowly is that no one notices until you're already gone. Then one morning in March, he told me he'd be leaving again. A month this time. Tokyo, Frankfurt. Somewhere I stopped keeping track of. I nodded, like I always did. He kissed my forehead. Not my lips. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. And then he was gone, and the house was mine again. The silence returned like an old friend. But that week, it didn't stay quiet for long. That same afternoon, I heard a car door slam in the driveway. I peeked through the curtain and saw Aiden, my husband's son from his first marriage. My stepson. He was back from college, early for spring break. I hadn't seen him in months. He looked older now, taller, his shoulders broader, his jaw more defined, still polite, still kind. Still the boy I helped raise through awkward teen years and soccer tournaments. But something had changed. Maybe it was me. We exchanged small talk in the kitchen. He offered to help unload groceries. Still drinking that same boring tea, he teased with a grin. I laughed. That laugh surprised me. It wasn't polite. It was real. For the first time in a long time, I felt awake. The next few days blurred into routines that felt unfamiliar. He'd make breakfast before I even came downstairs. He'd sit with me while I watched old movies. He listened, not out of obligation, but with attention. One evening, while trimming roses by the porch, he said, "You always keep things so beautiful. You hold this house together." You know, I didn't know how to respond. My husband had never said anything like that. That night, after he went to bed, I stood at the bathroom mirror staring at myself. Same face. Same tired eyes. But something had shifted. Not because Aiden had said those words, but because I had heard them. This is not a story about lust or recklessness. It's a story about being seen, about what happens to a person when they've gone years without mattering, and when someone finally looks at you like you do matter, even if they shouldn't. What would you do? I didn't plan what came next. No one ever does. This is the story of the kiss that changed everything. And what happened when the only person who made me feel alive was someone I could never have. It's easy to fall in love when you're young, when your heart is still open and soft, when you believe in fairy tales, in meant to be, in the kind of love that finds you in airports and bookstores and makes your skin warm just from a glance. That's how I met David. He was charismatic, one of those men who always knew what to say, who turned every moment into a moment. We met at a business conference. He complimented my pen. My pen. I laughed. And somehow, that became the beginning of everything. He was older. A successful executive already walking ahead of the world I was just stepping into. I was in awe of him. He was confident, generous, commanding. The kind of man you mistake for stability when you've never had it. And he saw something in me. Or at least, that's what I believed. Within a year, we were married. He had a son from his first marriage, Aiden, who lived with his mother at the time. I met him a few times in passing. A quiet boy with curious eyes and a backpack too big for his frame. At the wedding, Aiden brought me a single flower and said, "Thank you for loving my dad." I remember how that melted me. Back then, I thought, this is it. This is my family. This is my life now. We moved into a home David picked. Large, modern, far from the city. I left my job soon after. "You won't need to work," he said. "Just take care of the home. Relax. Live." It sounded romantic at first, but no one warns you that the silence of being kept can grow louder than traffic, louder than any office buzz, louder than loneliness itself. The first few years were fine. I learned how to decorate, how to host, how to make salmon 3 different ways. I tried to be perfect, not because David demanded it. He never raised his voice, but because I thought that's what love looked like. And then the silence began to change. David's work got busier. He was gone more. His phone calls grew shorter. He brought home more souvenirs, but fewer stories. His eyes were on screens, spreadsheets, schedules, not me. We never fought. There was no cruelty, just the slow erosion of connection, like water wearing down a stone. Day after day, year after year, and somewhere in all that, Aiden moved in. He was 12 when he came to live with us. His mother was moving abroad for work. It was supposed to be temporary. It lasted years. I took care of him, helped with homework, attended school plays, sat beside him during dentist appointments and fevers. I became his parent, in all the ways that mattered. But I was careful to stay formal, respectful. I wasn't his mother, and I never tried to be. He always called me Laura, not Mom. Still, we shared a home, a rhythm. Quiet dinners when David traveled, weekend chores, grocery lists, snowy mornings and pancake Sundays. He grew, I aged, and I did it all with a smile, because I had accepted this life. But here's something no one tells you about long-term marriage. You don't always fall out of love with a bang. Sometimes, it fades the same way you forget a dream after waking. There's no final fight, no explosive argument, just a series of moments you stop sharing, jokes that no longer land, kisses that become routine, glances that pass through you instead of landing on you. We hadn't had sex in nearly 4 years. No one cheated. No one yelled. We simply stopped. Psychologists refer to this as emotional neglect in marriage. It's not abuse in the traditional sense. There's no bruising, no cruel words, no screaming. But the absence of presence, the lack of real connection can be just as damaging. In one study by Dr. John Gottman, couples who reported emotional loneliness were 3 times more likely to seek extramarital fulfillment, not because of lust, but because of the need to feel seen. I didn't want another man. I didn't want to break my vows. I just wanted to feel like I mattered again. There was a day, maybe a year before everything, when I stood in front of David in the kitchen and said, "Do you still find me beautiful?" He was scrolling through his phone. He looked up briefly and said, "Of course." Then back to his email. I laughed it off, but I went upstairs and cried quietly in the bathroom. Because he said the right thing, but didn't mean it. Love isn't just a word. It's a mirror. And when that mirror stops reflecting you, you start to vanish. I didn't know how lonely I was until someone looked at me differently. By the time David's next trip rolled around, I had already stopped asking when he'd be back. It didn't matter. I had learned how to fill the silence with routines. I scheduled my days, made lists, cleaned surfaces, answered calls from neighbors I barely liked. I performed my role like a dutiful actress without applause, without direction, until Aiden came back. He returned for spring break with a duffel bag and an easy smile. He hugged me hello, and I felt it linger. Not long enough to accuse, but long enough to notice. Something in his eyes had changed. Or maybe it was me. Maybe I had been waiting for someone to see me again for so long that I mistook attention for affection. But in that moment, standing in the doorway with the scent of rain in the air and a young man's arms around me, I felt something stir. Not desire. Not yet. But awareness. The kind of awareness that marks the beginning of something and the end of something else. When Aiden returned from college that March, it wasn't supposed to mean anything. It was just spring break. 1 week. 7 days. That's what I told myself. I told myself a lot of things back then. He walked into the house with that familiar grin, the one I'd seen on him since he was 12, only now it came with stubble and confidence. He had the ease of someone who knew exactly who he was becoming, and yet still held a softness in his voice when he said, "Hi, Laura. You look really nice." I smiled. "Welcome home." The word home came out heavier than I expected. He set down his bag and looked around like he was seeing the house for the first time. "Everything looks the same," he said, "but it feels different." It did feel different. Or maybe I was different. He asked if I still made my famous lemon pasta. I laughed. "Only if you help." We spent that evening in the kitchen. He chopped herbs while I boiled pasta. We talked about his classes, professors, how his roommates snored like a dying engine. I listened, really listened. I hadn't had a real conversation like that in months, and for a moment, the kitchen didn't feel cold anymore. It felt like company. When dinner was over, he offered to do the dishes. He always had good manners. I watched him from the hallway, sleeves rolled up, humming softly. And I remember thinking, not in a romantic way, but just noticing how grown he had become. Not just older, but present, here, real. And that alone made him feel different. The next few days were simple, but in simplicity, meaning hides. He brought me coffee in the morning, just the way I liked it, 2 sugars, splash of oat milk. He offered to come along for errands. He sat on the couch while I watched reruns I loved and never had anyone to share with. I chalked it up to kindness, to boredom, to nothing at all. But it wasn't nothing, because what started as convenience slowly became comfort. Here's where many people would say, "It's just your stepson." That's a hard no. That's the line. And you'd be right. But emotional boundaries don't collapse in an instant. They fray, they blur, they shift when one person is starving, and another offers attention even if unintentionally. In 2021, a psychological study published in the Journal of Family Psychology found that over 38% of emotional affairs begin without conscious intent. They start as friendship, as shared laughter, as someone finally seeing me again. They often begin when someone who shouldn't matter becomes the only person who does. That's what was happening to me. One night, we were on the porch. The sky burned gold behind clouds, and the breeze smelled like rain. I brought out 2 glasses of iced tea. He was already sitting, arms stretched behind his head. The picture of calm youth. "Beautiful evening," I said. He nodded. "It's even better with you out here." The words felt harmless, but the way he said them didn't. I turned to face him, eyebrow raised. "Flattering your stepmother now," he chuckled. But then he looked serious. "No, I mean it. You. Hold this place together. Always have." I froze, not because the words were inappropriate, but because they were true. He didn't touch me. He didn't flirt, but his presence wrapped around me like a memory I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. We sat in silence for a long time after that, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be broken. Just before we went inside, he said something so soft I almost missed it. "It's good to be home, with you here." I went to bed that night and lay awake for hours. My thoughts weren't scandalous. They were sad, because someone had just made me feel alive again, and I didn't know how to live with that. I once read a Reddit story from a woman in her 50s who wrote, "My son's best friend started spending more time at our house than his own. One day, he told me I was the reason he felt safe again. I didn't act on it. I never would. But for the first time in a decade, I cried in the shower because I realized I missed being wanted." It's not about betrayal. It's about awakening. Sometimes, pain doesn't come from what happens. It comes from remembering what's been missing. The next morning, Aiden complimented my dress. A plain blue thing I hadn't even thought twice about. "You should wear that color more," he said, casually, pouring coffee. I felt my face flush. That day, I spent 20 minutes picking out an outfit just to go to the grocery store. I hated myself for it, but I did it anyway. At first, I thought I was imagining it, that I was projecting my loneliness onto this boy I'd helped raise, that my craving for affection was distorting my reality. But then, he touched my hand, by accident, maybe But he didn't pull away, and I didn't either. And something passed between us, something unspoken, but real. We didn't speak of it. But from that moment on, everything changed. I told myself I was overthinking it, that I was just lonely, that Aiden was just kind. But deep down, I knew. You always know, even when you pretend you don't. We didn't talk about what happened on the porch, about the way his hand brushed mine and lingered, about how he looked at me too long, too openly. But everything after that moment had a different weight. He started joining me more often, even when I didn't ask. He'd offer to cook dinner, even though I never liked anyone in my kitchen. He sat next to me on the couch, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, but not so close that I could accuse. We watched movies I used to love, ones I'd stopped watching years ago because David never paid attention. Aiden laughed when I laughed, noticed when I winced, asked questions, listened. It's the listening that's the most dangerous thing. Not the hand, not the kiss. The ear, the one that hears the things no one else ever bothered to ask. One night, we were watching a film, some old black and white classic, when I realized I couldn't even remember the last time I'd laughed with my husband. Aiden looked over and said softly, "It's nice to hear you laugh like that." I turned to him. "What do you mean?" He smiled. Small, sincere. "I don't think I've ever seen you really happy before." This is where emotional infidelity often begins. According to licensed marriage therapist Esther Perel, emotional affairs don't always start with attraction, they begin with connection. With two people building a private world that no one else is allowed into. That world can start as innocent as shared laughter and become devastating. Emotional intimacy is when someone knows your soul. Physical intimacy is just your skin. One often leads to the other not out of lust, but out of recognition. I didn't crave Aiden. I craved myself, the version of me I saw reflected in his eyes. Later that week, we were standing in the kitchen after dinner. I was putting away dishes when he walked up behind me to grab a plate from the top shelf. His hand brushed my back just a second too long. I froze. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He just looked at me. Calm, still. That's when I knew. We never said anything out loud, but the silence between us became charged. He started watching me more. His gaze wasn't inappropriate. It was intentional. Focused. Curious. He started asking more personal questions. What made you fall in love with Dad? Did you ever want kids of your own? Do you still write poetry like you used to? I hadn't written in years. I used to be a writer once before I became someone's wife, someone's stepmother, someone's placeholder. Aiden made me remember that I existed before my marriage. There's a blog entry written by a 46-year-old woman that went viral years ago. She titled it, "I Didn't Cheat, But I Wanted to." She wrote, "He was my student's father. He made me laugh. I told him things I hadn't even told my husband. I never touched him. I never crossed the line. But I left school early every Friday just to talk to him for 10 minutes before pickup. And when he moved, I cried for a week. I didn't cheat, but I fell in love with how I felt around him." That's the kind of affair no one sees coming. That story haunted me because I knew I was already there. I tried to fight it. One afternoon, I asked Aiden if he'd like to go see his friends in town. I told him I was sure he had better things to do than hang around the house with me. He looked confused, then disappointed. "Is this about earlier?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, it's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. The truth is, I was afraid. Afraid of what might happen if I let this go further, but also afraid of what I'd become if I didn't. Because when you start to feel visible again, when your heart begins to stir after years of stillness, it feels like life returning to your body. And the thought of going back to numbness feels like death. That night, it rained. Hard. Lightning danced across the sky like a warning. Then darkness. A power outage. I lit a few candles in the living room. The house felt heavy and old. A storm can make a place feel haunted, even when it's full of life. I sat on the couch, blanket around my shoulders. Aiden walked in holding 2 glasses of wine. He didn't say anything at first, just handed me the glass and sat beside me. We didn't touch. We didn't even speak. The only sound was rain tapping against the windows and our breath. Then he said, You don't even realize how incredible you are. Do you? I looked at him, unsure. He continued. You hold so much inside you. Strength, kindness. You deserve to be seen. No one had said that to me in years. And certainly not like that. He reached for my hand, his fingers wrapped around mine gently, respectfully. I should have pulled away. But I didn't. Because in that moment, I wasn't thinking about what was right or wrong. I was thinking about how long it had been since someone had touched me and meant it. He leaned in, slowly. No force, no rush. Just two people suspended between silence and something deeper. Our lips met. Soft, brief, but filled with years. I didn't stop it, and I didn't apologize for it. Not then, because in that moment, I wasn't someone's wife. I wasn't his stepmother. I was just a woman who had spent too long unseen. Finally being looked at. The kiss wasn't long. It wasn't dramatic, or passionate, or wild like in the movies. It was gentle, soft, almost sad. But it broke something. Not in the house, not in the world, in me. I stood up without a word and said I needed to sleep. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the heat of it still on my lips. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my heart racing like it hadn't in years. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I remembered. I remembered what it felt like to be wanted, to be touched not out of obligation, but out of desire, to feel chosen, not out of routine, but out of recognition. And yet, under that flicker of rediscovered womanhood was a heavy ache, because I had crossed a line, and no matter how gently it was done, it was still betrayal, not just of my husband, but of everything I had told myself I stood for. The aftermath of an emotional affair turned physical doesn't always feel like sin. It often feels like awakening wrapped in regret. According to the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, 45% of people involved in emotional affairs say, the most difficult part isn't the fallout. It's realizing how emotionally dead their marriage had become. The guilt isn't about what you did, it's about what it revealed. That you stopped being a wife years ago, long before the kiss. You just didn't know it until someone else pulled the curtain back. I didn't sleep that night. My mind played it over again and again. His hand, his voice, the moment his lips brushed mine and my body didn't retreat. The next morning, the sun was warm. Birds chirped like nothing had changed. But I moved through the kitchen like a machine. Coffee, toast, dishes. Aiden walked in like nothing had happened. He offered to help with breakfast. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the counter. We didn't talk about it. We didn't need to. It was there between us, loud in its silence, heavy in its absence of apology. He handed me a plate. Our hands touched. I didn't move away. That afternoon, I caught him watching me again. But it wasn't curiosity anymore. It was something else. Possession, longing, guilt. I couldn't tell. I avoided mirrors that day because I didn't want to see what had changed in my eyes. In a podcast about emotional fidelity, one woman shared, I kissed my husband's brother once. Just once. It was a lonely moment at a family funeral. We didn't speak of it after he moved away. My husband never found out. But to this day, I remember it not as betrayal but as a message. That I had become invisible in my own marriage. The real betrayal wasn't the kiss. It was the emptiness that allowed it to happen. I played that story back in my head for days, because it echoed the truth I was too afraid to say aloud. Aiden didn't bring it up again. But he didn't undo it either. He began spending more time around me, offering to run errands, sitting closer, asking deeper questions. One night, he asked, do you regret it? I didn't answer, because my silence was its own confession. I told myself it wouldn't happen again. I set rules in my mind. No lingering touches, no shared wine, no porch talks. But the body doesn't follow rules made in shame. The next time his hand brushed mine, I held it longer. The next time he looked at me, I looked back. Not because I wanted him, but because I wanted to feel alive again. One afternoon, I told him, we can't do this. It's not right. He nodded. I know. I turned away. Then he whispered, but I don't want to go back to pretending either. I froze, because that's what marriage had become. pretending. Later that night, he touched my cheek. "Laura," he said, "you don't have to keep performing. You're allowed to feel." I wanted to scream, to run, to cry. But instead, I just closed my eyes and let his fingers stay there on my face. And in that stillness, I knew I wasn't who I thought I was anymore. Affairs, especially emotional ones, don't start with desire. They start with depletion. People cheat for many reasons, but more often than not, it's not about sex. It's about self-worth. It's about looking in someone else's eyes and seeing the version of yourself you've forgotten. I started journaling after that, not about Aiden, about me, about how I hadn't felt beautiful in years, how I missed music, missed laughing, missed dancing barefoot in the kitchen, how I used to be someone before I became someone's wife. That's the danger of long-term silence in a marriage. It doesn't shout, it whispers. And over time, those whispers can bury you. Aiden's break was ending. The countdown began. And suddenly every minute felt stolen. Every glance loaded. Every word double-edged. I knew he would leave. But what scared me more was what would be left behind inside of me when he did. Because I had tasted something forbidden not just in him, but in myself. And I couldn't unfeel it. Aiden's break was coming to an end. I knew the date, March 26th. A Sunday, he would drive back to campus. Classes would resume, and I would stay here, in this house, in this silence. The week before he left felt like walking through water. Heavy, slow, every movement laced with dread. We didn't talk about the kiss again. We didn't name what we were, because naming it would have made it real. And if it was real, it couldn't be undone. He started packing early, folded shirts with intention, checked his textbooks, rearranged toiletries. I watched him from the hallway, unseen, not like before when he truly saw me. Now, he was focused, not cold, not cruel, but distant. That was the first time I felt it regret, not for the kiss, but for what it had stolen. The easiness between us, the quiet companionship, the safety of pretending we were just family. The night before he left, he knocked on my door. I expected a confession, a goodbye, a promise. He offered none. He just stood there for a moment, eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "I don't regret it," he said. "But I don't want to ruin your life either." I opened my mouth, but no words came. My throat closed. My hands trembled. I nodded once. He left my doorway, and in doing so, left something in me undone. The next morning, I stood at the door and watched his car pull out of the driveway. No hug, no ceremony, just a quiet exit, like it had never happened, like I had imagined it all. The silence after he left was different, not the same emptiness I'd lived with before. This was louder, because I had felt something, and now I couldn't pretend I hadn't. 3 days later, my husband returned, suitcase in hand, cologne too strong, jet lag in his eyes. He kissed me on the cheek. "How was everything?" "Fine," I said, the same lie I'd always told. He unpacked in the living room souvenirs from Singapore, receipts from Frankfurt, a new tie from Dubai. He talked about flight delays and conference calls. He scrolled through photos on his phone and handed me a snow globe for the mantle. I thanked him. I smiled. But something in me was screaming, "Can't you see it? Can't you feel it? I'm not the woman you left behind." But he didn't, because he had never really looked. That night, we had dinner together. He spoke for 20 minutes about a business merger. I nodded at the right times, refilled his glass, passed him the salt. He didn't notice the tremble in my hand, the hollow in my eyes. When the meal was over, he said, "You're quiet tonight." I said, "Just tired." Another lie. What I really wanted to say was, "I kissed your son." And I haven't stopped feeling it since. But I couldn't, because no one would understand. Not him, not anyone. Many people believe betrayal begins with physical touch, but often, it begins in the heart, and it's not always sexual. It's in the moment when someone else finally acknowledges your pain, your worth, your existence. In a study by clinical psychologist Shirley Glass, most women who engage in emotional or physical affairs cite lack of emotional connection as the cause, not lust. They were not looking to cheat. They were looking to feel, I looked at my husband that night and realized I was alone again. But this time, not because I wasn't seen, but because I no longer wanted to be. Weeks passed. The house resumed its rhythm. The laundry, the grocery lists, the sound of David's phone calls echoing down the hall. But I was not the same. I didn't laugh as often, didn't wear the blue dress anymore, stopped watching old movies. I moved like a ghost, carrying a secret that weighed more each day. On an anonymous forum, a woman once posted, "I had an affair. He left. My husband stayed. Everyone thinks I'm lucky. But what they don't know is that my husband never asked why I strayed, never asked how I was doing. He was just happy things went back to normal. But they never did. I smile at family dinners. I hold his hand in public. But inside, I'm mourning a version of myself I buried to stay married." That story stayed with me because I had become her. Aiden texted me once, just 5 words. "Take care of yourself, please." I stared at it for an hour, then deleted it. Not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much. That's the cruelest part of a quiet affair. No one finds out. No one screams. No one packs bags. No one burns bridges. You're not punished with scandal. You're punished with silence. My marriage remained intact. The photos stayed on the wall. The dinners kept coming. But I was no longer in it. Not fully. Not honestly. I had become a spectator in my own life. Love without presence is not love. It's obligation. And obligation will starve your soul. And when someone finally feeds it, even if only for a moment, you'll never forget the taste. It's been months since Aiden left. David is still here. The house still stands. Dinner is still at 6:30. The calendar still marks meetings, birthdays, grocery runs. But inside, I have changed. I used to think betrayal was loud, that it came with slammed doors, lipstick-stained collars, broken trust, angry tears. But now I know that some betrayals are quiet. They come in the form of long silences, of needs ignored, of eyes that no longer see you. And some betrayals aren't even of others. They're of ourselves. When we stop honoring our own loneliness, when we erase our needs just to keep the peace, when we forget who we used to be and accept that as normal. I didn't cheat because I was cruel. I kissed him because I was starving. For affection, for recognition, for someone to say, "I see you." And for a brief moment he did. It's easy to judge this story, but the truth is, emotional affairs are more common than we like to admit, especially in long-term marriages where the emotional intimacy fades long before the vows do. Marriage therapists refer to this as roommate syndrome, a condition where spouses stop connecting and start coexisting, sharing a roof, but not a life. And for many women, especially those in their 40s and 50s, the silence becomes suffocating. According to a 2023 survey, nearly 1 in 4 married women have considered emotional or physical intimacy outside their marriage not to rebel, but to feel human again. So this story is not rare. It's just rarely spoken aloud. I'm not proud of what I did, but I don't hate myself for it either, because that kiss didn't come from a place of manipulation. It came from a place of absence. And no one can survive too long in a place where they no longer feel real. David still doesn't know, and maybe he never will. But I know, and I live with it. Not as a scar, but as a mark of awakening. Because once someone sees you again, you can't go back to being invisible. I've started going to therapy, not to fix my marriage, but to find myself. The woman who used to write poetry, who loved red wine and French cinema, who danced in the kitchen to old jazz songs, who once believed she deserved to be cherished. She's still in there, and I owe it to her to come back. Aiden didn't save me. He revealed the part of me I had abandoned, and for that I'm grateful, even if we never speak again. So if you're watching this, and you feel unseen, if you've become a background character in your own life, if you're surviving in silence, please hear this. You are not crazy. You are not selfish. You are not ungrateful. You are human. And humans need connection. They need to feel chosen. They need to be touched not just physically, but emotionally. If your partner has stopped showing up, talk to them. If they won't listen, speak anyway. If they still don't hear you speak to someone else, a friend, a therapist, yourself, just don't disappear. You deserve to be loved out loud, not quietly tolerated. In the end, I didn't lose my marriage, but I did lose my illusions. And sometimes, losing the illusion is the first step to finding the truth. Attention without commitment is temptation. Commitment without attention is a cage. Choose freedom. Choose truth. Choose to be seen,